May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Happy Valentine's Day and happy Transfiguration Sunday. What do these two ideas have to do with one another? And don't think I can't see you out there wondering. I see that. You may think that this is a dubious connection, but let's walk together. Walk with me a bit and let's explore. Some of you this very morning may have already received or maybe have given a Valentine. And even if you didn't, most of you know the heart, the symbol of Valentine's Day. You see it in windows in the shops. They're all over, everywhere. They're in cards. They're even in the grocery store. And the common emblem is what? A heart shot through with an arrow. And the heart is not an anatomically correct heart, like our heart that pumps our blood through our bodies, and it doesn't directly refer to the heart in our bodies. But rambling around through the wiki thickets, we learn that the heart comes from the peepal leaf. That's P-E-E-P-A-L, and it is an ancient symbol, really as early as the early Middle Ages, the 11th century. And by the Middle Ages, around the 15th century, it began to be the metaphorical center of human emotion, and particularly romantic love. So then, enter Cupid, the god of desire, attraction, and affection in classical mythology. As early as ancient Greece, Cupid's superpower was his bow and arrow. A person or even a deity who is shot by Cupid's arrow is suddenly filled with uncontrollable desire. And we know that from our English word cupidity. The wiki thickets also tell us that cupids are a frequent motif in both Roman art and then later classical Western art. By the 15th century, the iconography of Cupid starts to become indistinguishable from the church and from the cherub. And under Christian influence, Cupid the cherub begins to represent both heavenly and earthly love. So, just because you thought I'd never get there, here's the Transfiguration part. Those struck with Cupid's arrow are suddenly filled with love for the next person they see. Cupid's bow and arrow are a metaphor for something that's really hard to describe or explain. But when a person's heart is pierced by Cupid's arrow, the person immediately sees another person as beloved. That person is transfigured in the first person's eyes. It might be somebody familiar or someone we've never seen before. But Cupid's bow and arrow symbolize the transformation of how we see another. Our lectionary today gives us two great moments of transfiguration when we can see and feel God's presence and God's love. Theologians call these moments theophanies, the moments of clarity when God shows up, and there's no doubt about it. In our first reading from the second book of Kings, we catch up with the prophet Elijah and his protege and successor, Elisha. Elijah knows he's close to death, and God has told him to go to Bethel. Elisha is dutiful, loyal, and probably more than a little scared. He continues to follow Elijah, even walking through the river Jordan after Elijah parts the river so that they can walk through on dry land. And then We all know the hymn, "Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home." And that's what we see. A chariot of fire and horses of fire rush between Elijah and Elisha, and Elijah ascends in a whirlwind into heaven. North Carolina Methodist preacher James Howell writes, "We sing, swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home, although in all the annals of history, we really only know one chariot that accompanied a homecoming, and it's this one." The chariot is beyond our explanation, as the writer of 2 Kings surely meant it to be. Because often preachers can be way too confident in trying to explain things when we try to make what is really mysterious clear. I'm going to follow Elisha's example here and just point to the experiences we have it. God came very close, swinging down low and sweet right into our lives. And that experience transfigured Elijah and ushered his protege Elisha and us looking on into the presence of the holy and living God. So it shouldn't surprise us that Elijah also shows up in Jesus' transfiguration experience, just to make God's presence clear to Peter, James, and John, because they were good Jews who certainly knew about the prophets Elijah and Elisha and the chariots of fire. So Elijah shows up at the Transfiguration on top of Mount Tabor. The church remembers that mountain out in the middle of nowhere in the Galilee. And when you climb up that mountain, you can see for miles, out over the vineyards, out over the fields where the crops are growing, into the little villages, and even out on the Sea of Galilee, where the fishing boats are bobbing. And as homiletics professor Tom Long tells us, things are supposed to look different from the mountaintop. That's the whole point. One of the things we see on the mountaintop is that Jesus is beloved by God. We could never have seen that in the vineyards or in the synagogues below. We wouldn't have even guessed he was beloved by anybody. Already, he has been misunderstood by his disciples, rejected by his hometown, drained of his power, by his neighbors' scoffing unbelief, and plotted against by the authorities. And it's about to get even worse. Jesus knows he must undergo great suffering and be rejected. Jesus, beloved? Hardly. But if we see Jesus for real on that mountain, we can see ourselves for real too. Aren't there parallels between our pandemic life in all of its inequities and divisions, political, economic, racial, gender, healthcare, illness? Can't we see parallels between Jesus' ministry before the Transfiguration? Jesus' ministry experienced rejection, failure, and violence. And our lives have too. Down in our own valley, sometimes we see hope slipping away. But up on that mountain, we can see ourselves in Jesus' light. We can see our own baptismal garments dazzling like the sun, see the cloud of God's care hovering over our heads, and hear God calling us beloved? Last Sunday, Saturday, under Liz McCarthy's direction and with loads of help from your wardens and their families, we finished cleaning out the parish auditorium, formerly Emmanuel Day School, our beloved school. And we've really felt our hopes bruised and battered through this past year, not only from the loss of the school and the teachers and their families, but also from our worship. We've been separated from each other and separated and fearful about finding ways to support this beautiful building and to have the church sing with life again. And the EDS classroom has been a valley where our worries and our fears and our failures piled up and were really visible in the unused children's books and toys and chairs and tables. But in this big effort over the fall and this past week, God swung down low and sweet. And our parish auditorium has been transfigured. It's not a mountaintop, but it's a totally new landscape. And when you stand in that beautiful room, as I did last week, with the sun pouring in the windows and glancing off the floor, it is a transfigured landscape. God has come near, and our lives and spaces are hopeful and filled with new possibility. Amen.